Good afternoon again, and welcome back to our 2020 IFSF Annual Conference. So I'm François Mezzina, recent president of IFSF, and I will be somehow the moderator for the next presentation, or more, I will dialogue with Jan. So many of you will have known Jan Brown for many years, either in his role at BP or as the president of IFSF. So we were delighted to be able to persuade Jan to come back to IFSF after he retired to continue to support our API work. So today, Jan will be explaining why we all need to know enough about APIs, to know why our industry needs them during these challenging times. So Jan, you are going to explain APIs for non-technical people and the work of IFSF.
Exactly. Really, this is not a technical session. This is, as you say, what you need to know about APIs. One of my colleagues used to say, enough to be dangerous. If you want the technical stuff, that's on the next day, on Thursday, and we'll tell you about that at the end.
Okay. So, please, what is the beginning of the story?
Yeah. So the structure for this session, just to give the quick outline, we'll start with the business problem that we think we're solving here, and then move on to the solution and APIs and how IFSF work can help with that. As always, there's time for questions, and in fact, like the best convenience stores offering, food for now or food for later, we're doing the same with our questions. So some of our questions we'll answer straight away, and others are you're welcome to ask things for our panel session, which is on Friday. Again, we'll publicize that at the end. And as usual, questions into the chat anytime, please.
Yes, please.
Okay, I've lost the button to move on. Here we go. So let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to start with some ancient history. And with COVID, like everybody, I suppose, I've had time to look at some topics I wouldn't normally have time to think about, and found looking back some surprising parallels with today, including the business problem I'm going to talk about. And I should add here, I'm not a history expert. Probably, maybe some people listening will know far more about this than I do. But what I've read, it seems to be generally accepted current research. There's always more research which may add to the story, but that's what I see today. And in fact, 5 similarities jumped out at me between this ancient history and today, and it's the 5th of those that's very relevant. So going on to the next slide, we're starting 12,000 years ago. So this is the time of the Stone Age, the hunter-gatherer.
What a contrast with the previous presentation.
Yes, I thought so. We go even earlier than those industrial revolutions that Stephen talked about. We go back to actually what was a different revolution. This is a Neolithic Revolution, as it's called. Yeah. So before Trump, before Brexit, before COVID-19, but maybe not everything. But I'll come to that. So we know the time. We've probably all got stereotypes in our mind of the hunter-gatherer, whether they look like that or something else, I don't know. They would have be going around in small tribes, nomadic existence, hunting or gathering whatever fruit, roots, vegetables, animals they can find, and moving on from area to area as they think life will be easier somewhere else. Even though they're nomadic, just like animals in the same situation today, they have some territorial needs that they need their space, and competition maybe is unwelcome. So meeting other tribes at that time is not likely to lead to trade. It's more likely fighting. Even so, I mean, there was some trade, but not a great deal. And I move on to what were they hunting, and this slide is going to illustrate two of the other problems that were around at that time. Obviously, various animals were being hunted. The woolly mammoth is one, which you probably recognise there, which became extinct. It seems to be two reasons they became extinct. One, of course, was hunting, just like today with overfishing or whatever else. You know, mankind is ending various species existence. Another one, though, was, and kind of illustrated here, is climate change. Again, parallel with today. This time it's the end of the last ice age. So 12,000 years ago, we were sort of, the Earth had started warming up, definitely, and the ice was receding. I should maybe mention, I've got various diagrams here from Wikipedia. There are better ones around, but not ones which have free use on publicity. So I've had to stick to some things which are maybe not the best diagrams. But the next one is going to be a bit crowded. So this is a map of, I'm sure you recognize it, Africa down the bottom here, Europe and Asia at the top. And just to work around it, so there's 4 of them. The numbers here are the time, so 42,000 years. I think BP means before present, not the oil company, my former employer. So 42,000 years ago, 30, 21 and 6. So I'm talking about 12. So we're in between these bottom 2. The colors on the pictures here, the red, you know, the opposite to what you might usually expect. In this case, red is good. So this is about woolly mammoths, and the red is an area which is good for them to live in. The green is the opposite. That's getting bad for them. So as you'd expect, as the ice decreases, that's going north. And over this 21 years, the good areas in Europe and Asia at least are presumably the mountainous regions. By 6,000 years ago, they've practically gone. The black line here is mankind, so how far north they've traveled. You know, as we know, our species came out of Africa over this small land barrier here into Europe and Asia and worked their way north. And again, as the ice retreats, no surprise, they've got further north. The grey area, of course, it's no good for woolly mammoths at all. And so focusing on, we're going to move into the very eastern edge of the Mediterranean with the next slide. And this is the area known as, or got named as, the Fertile Crescent. So what's happening here? For various reasons, this became an area which was, you know, to lead the next bit of development of mankind and this Neolithic Revolution we're coming to. So just like man was coming out of Africa, so over the bridge, so we've got the Nile here, we've got Persian Gulf, the 2 rivers between Mesopotamia. So man's coming over here, but so are animals and so are crops actually. And if I move on to the next slide, we can see some of the crops that started to appear. So cereals, wheat, grasses, early barley, rye. Our hunters-gatherers would have known how to gather these, we understand, but they're different to, you know, what the conventional things hunter-gatherers would have collected, because, you know, these drop their seeds at a particular time. You can gather a lot and store them. You can plant them if you want some more of, you like something, you want to plant it. Obviously, you need tools to process them. They also self-pollinate. They don't need other plants, other species to help them pollinate. And to some extent, they can be used to feed those animals that I mentioned coming over. So because in this area, we had things we'd recognize: cows, goats, sheep, pigs. So quite a long lead up, but I'm leading to, this is the start of farming. And farming started in that area, that Fertile Crescent, as far as I say, as far as evidence of historic evidence shows, that's where it started. At the same time, populations, of course, we're no longer hunter-gatherers. They're farming. That means they're static and they can support a larger population. So it's the start of civilization as well. This brings along the third and fourth parallel I was going to bring up about today. So the first is eating these cereals. That's, it's carbohydrates. So they're onto a richer carbohydrate diet. And start to put on weight. I doubt they had an obesity crisis like today, but still interesting. There was a change in the diets in such a way. And then the fourth issue, which arose that time, was the animals. I mean, animals were useful not just to eat. There was milk, of course, from some of them. They could use their labor for carrying things, plowing. There's wool. So, animals are valuable to the people at this time. They were looking after them. I suppose they were fencing them in, I don't know. But either way, they're close to the animals and start getting diseases from the animals at this time. So scary parallel with today. So now we're on to the fifth problem, which is the point of the whole story. So farming, as I say, brings the start of civilization. We've got larger groups. People are starting to specialize. Somebody's collecting seeds, somebody else is building storage containers, I suppose. Others doing milk, others doing wool. Francois, I imagine if this was all happening in Paris with that milk and those cereals, they'd start making baguettes and camembert. Do you think?
Yes, most probably. We wouldn't produce any cheddar or those English cheeses.
English breads. Oh, I thought you liked toast.
I like them, but clearly they would be different, or it would be also different in Italy. If I were to take the mozzarella, for instance, the milk is treated a different way wherever you are in the world, in fact. So
yes,
there are different standards, in fact, for transforming the milk, to take an example of.
Yeah, and the dough, I understand the French bread is some special dough, which I've never understood what it is.
The best in the world, of course.
Oh, of course, yes. I should have known. So moving on, we'll continue. So the point is, all these specialists need to share or swap what they produce. They need to trade with whoever needs their stuff. In their civilization, there's not wide trade, and that's what's new. So what evolved from that is, I'll go into the next slide. Oops, wrong thing. Is this the market? Obviously, this isn't a Neolithic market. We've got cars and buildings at the front, but it's just again, as I say, a public picture of a market I could use. But in fact, again, back to history in Mesopotamia, this area, that's where people have seen the oldest evidence of markets existing. And it makes sense, anybody could set up their stall, bring along their produce, and anyone else can come along and see what's available and trade with them. And the point is, they didn't need to know who the other party was or what was going to be there. Just come along and see what it is. So jump forward to today, and the problem is now the same, but it's about data. We've already heard from Stephen and Matthew about data, customers with mobile commerce, click and collect, they need your data, your stock levels, your whatever, your products, your offer, or maybe your allergy information. Suppliers want your sales for delivery just in time. You probably have intermediaries somewhere, whether it's people delivering your products, people, a B2B2C intermediary like BMO or someone else offering a click and collect platform for you. A partner app perhaps, or partners who are interacting with you. Similarly, your sites now would, already we have multiple selling points on the site, not just a single point of sale. You might have pay at pump, but more than that with mobile, or even that Amazon offer. You know, there could be multiple points of sale, effectively virtual points of sale, and you need a consolidated view of your business. And even running your business, you know, there's a lot of data. There's staff who needs to know some things about your company, maintenance providers, perhaps loyalty scheme, other partners, promotion officers, marketing, accounting, all are asking for more data. And that's before we get to AI, which we know works best with as much data as possible. So all these data sources need to share with whichever process they can, or whichever system or process needs their data. But how do we join all those consumers of data with the actual source? And we can't plan ahead for all of them, so we need something flexible, and you know, the ability to chop and change and to add more. So just like those first Stone Age farmers, we need the market idea. So except this time it's a data market. Convinced, Francois? Do you think that's a good parallel?
Well, yes. Well, then I've got a question is, so you think people from the Stone Age had the answer to today's data problem?
Exactly.
But what about APIs? How do they help? You need to explain here.
True, we haven't got to APIs. Let's do that. Good point. And let's look at the features of APIs which help this data market. So I'll go to the next slide. And as you might expect, these days, you know, the internet comes into everything, and the internet is an enabler for the APIs, and the APIs use the internet. It's not just the only enabler that's, I mean, by coincidence coming at this time. Francois, you'd be the same in the retail networks that, you know, both of us have looked after from in the past, or you now. You know, communication to the site has never been, or not always been easy, but you know, cheap broadband has come. It's reaching many retail sites, not all to be fair, but many.
Yeah. Challenging even today still.
Yes, unfortunately. Yes. Computer power is cheaper, of course. We've got consumers living on the internet, so they're ready to interact with us that way. And as we've said, we've got an abundance of data. And so those are enablers for APIs, but now let's dive a little bit into APIs. As I said, this isn't too technical. It's a bit technical just now, and then we'll come back to the business problem. So first, an API, or an application programming interface, to give it its title, simply allows applications to talk to each other. Matthew's explained the same. So an API specifies the requests, the conventions, and the data formats that should be used when two applications talk. And there's three concepts around here which we'll run through quickly. First one, maybe to show how easy APIs are and how it links to the internet. You know, we're all used to typing, you know, www.something, you know, IFSF.org, for example. So an API is just like that. In fact, here is one. Here's an API you could call. I mean, it's called a joke API. It's a real API. It's not a joke API. It just happens to return a joke. So it shows how, you know, the format is very easy. You know, anybody can call that. And I think Mantu said the same, that your programmers, if you've got your own programs, will be used to using these kind of things. If I now look at some of the features of APIs and how they differ from what we had before. So this might be a traditional string of systems that I've certainly installed in my time, and I'm sure others will recognize them and probably still have many of them already. So an example will, you know, it's where data is passing from one system to another, for example, from a point of sale to a back office, then to a head office, and then to, you know, whatever, MI or an accounting system. And in this string, if you want to change, you know, you want a bit of extra information from the point of sale, say, to feed into your MI, well, that's a headache, because you've got to change all three interfaces here, and you've got to change, I assume you can see my cursor, you've got to change those in between systems, B and C, which aren't really interested in this bit of data. So, that's a lot of change just to get one extra bit of data from end to end. Move to the API world, and it's quite different. So the API, as we've said, we've shown, allows a direct connection from, like the market, from anything to anything. So you want a bit of data from A to D, they just connect A and D just for this point, build the API just for that data. All the rest of it just carried on as it was before, but you've put something extra in. And this can be quick, and it's flexible. And oh yeah, there's another one. You can add another one if you want. So quite easy to do. Third thing I'm going to show is just briefly how APIs do share data. Moving on to the next slide. So just 3 examples here. So as I say, the connection here can be a pull or a push. So let's start with the first one. So in this process or system D, perhaps it's running the process and wants something from A, so it just reaches out and gets it. And so a get command. And you can imagine, the process might be a reconciliation. We want, we're reconciling and we want a figure from the other system, so get that. Or perhaps we're a maintenance provider. We want to check, what's the meter on our car wash? How many times has it been used? Is it ready for our engineer to go out? To just get the meter read, that kind of thing. Post is the opposite. It's a push rather than a pull. So again, it might be a process running on system A this time, which decides it's relevant to send something to system F. You can imagine pricing would be a good example here. So if A was a pricing system and it's just calculated, hey, it's time to change the price, I'll calculate the price and then send it over to F. So that's a post, pushing it out. The next one, the last of these features, is the broadcast. So this is where A is just sending a series of events out to the world, or to as much of the world as you allow it to. And the others are listening. But the others will be listening and filtering out what they want. So if one of them wants one particular bit of data, it'll be, perhaps D wants a bit of data, it'll be listening out for that. And when it comes, it'll pick it up, and all the rest of the time it will ignore everything else. I've got an example. It actually, maybe I'll bring you in for this, Francois, but in my household, when my teenage daughter was here, she was quite afraid of spiders. So every now and then, somewhere in the house, I'd hear a screech of spider. And I was, of course, hearing what was going on in the background, and that came through my filter to say, okay, that means come and help me out, Dad.
I've experienced the same thing, Ian. I've got
Yes.
2 daughters and a wife, and I have the same experience with the spiders.
Mm-hmm.
And the same reaction as you had, saying, well, the message is telling me, in fact, I've got to come.
Yes, exactly.
That's a translation to be made,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Yes, and I think, if you agree, we've made a little case here for the use of APIs and how they help. But we need to bring in standards, and perhaps we go back to the teenagers for that. You've had teenagers, I've had teenagers, and we know you can be talking the same language to them, not in the case of a spider, but somehow not communicating. Those times when they just grunt, or they use some words you don't understand, or the context isn't there. They want to do something and you can't understand at all why are they saying they want to do that when we've agreed as a family we're going to do something else. You recognize that?
Yeah, it's to have the same basis, the same principles to communicate, that for teenagers are not obvious to understand the adult's world, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
We need to translate somehow.
Exactly, that's right. So when we're communicating, and APIs are no different, maybe I'll go into the next example here.
Yeah, so as such, if I'm trying to I agree that APIs can help this problem somehow by organizing, let's say, the communication. But now, can we bring in standards?
Exactly.
That's the question then.
Exactly. Let's do that. So, and this slide was intended just to talk around that for a moment. So here's it's another market. They keep propping up. A different one again. There's a lot going on here. There's in the way of communication. There's people, shouting at each other, or there's hand gestures. There's people making notes. Probably to an outsider, there's we wouldn't understand what's happening, what the messages mean. But to the people who are involved, they've agreed and learnt their own standards. What a gesture means, how a transaction is expected to progress, the sequence of events that should happen, the agreed communications which say, yes, I've moved on to the next stage, or equally the communication to say, no, I'm not moving on, the exception condition, I want to stop this transaction. So in their world, they need, common terminology, they need the messages, they need to understand the messages they're expecting, the sequence of events, and as I say, exception conditions. So they need, the same things actually as APIs need.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, your illustration is quite interesting because it shows that within an industry, there is a clear codification on how to communicate, to avoid any misunderstanding, and to, in this case, I believe it's kind of delicate not to misunderstand the number of millions of whatever dollars or euros to be traded, and here you cannot. You cannot have any mistakes in communications there. Otherwise, you could have a bad result for the, how do you say, the
yes, I think so. Yes,
the instruction, the order for it. So it's a good example to illustrate how key is the codified communication there.
Yes, and if we look at these headings, top common terminology, I mean, this is, you might call this a dictionary. The expected messages, you might say this is, the structure of a communication. The sequence of events, in our terminology, that could be a scenario or a use case, is what our work groups will talk about. Exception conditions are clear enough. So this is exactly what IFSF with Connexus, I'll go to that in a second, sorry, offer. So let's look at that. So just before I explain what we offer, I should mention our partners. Heather's already explained that we have a number of them, right at her introduction at the start of today. So Connexus, as many of you will know or even be part of, is a US-based standards body, similar in aim to IFSF, slightly different, but similar. And the two organizations have been collaborating for some time, announced this year in February. They all work together to create one global set of API standards for the fuel and convenience sector. And outside of that partnership, so that partnership is creating, as I say, standard APIs under the Open Retailing name. We'll put the name up shortly, so you can remember that. There's other partner organizations, already mentioned Nexo for payment, W3C, the Open Charge Alliance, who will actually be here on the panel session on Friday. There's chip card standards, parking. So our aim in IFSF in creating these APIs is to create something that is needed, that our members need, and that doesn't exist. If it exists already, perhaps from one of those other organizations, and is is suitable, and we could use it even in our industry, then yeah, we just recommend that. It doesn't make any sense to have two standards.
Yeah, I like the expression, I don't know if it's English or French, to say IFSF is not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Perfect, Francois, because actually I'm going back to my Stone Age. Again, there's evidence that the wheel was invented in the that Fertile Crescent around that
Exactly.
time. So yeah, interesting. Interesting bit of history, actually. Also, written language was started there as well, I'm told. Anyway, but that's another topic. Let's look at the open retailing resources. So this is the suite of resources that we're putting together, as I say, with Connexus under the open retailing name. And there's a link at the bottom there. You can go and look at what we've published as version 1 of our standards. There's a lot more that members can see, which is not version 1, which is under development. Oh, and John Carrier, I can see in the chat, is putting up more links because there's quite a lot in there. Thanks, John. So what do we consist of? We've already talked about terminology and the need for a dictionary. So yes, we've got one of those, absolutely. And there's nothing magic about having, I suppose, a dictionary. You need, like many people, to come together and discuss what attributes you need. And John Carrier, again, who put in the chat just now, has explained to us that a name like a pump, do you call it a pump? Do you call it a dispenser? Do you call it a fueling point? There's many different names you can use for things in our industry, and in the dictionary we've just got to pick the best one and use that, and that's how we establish a standard. And
it's more difficult because of American and English.
Yes, of course. Yes, our languages have strayed since that time in Mesopotamia when they were together. I agree, yes. The next part on here, we've got some design guides on APIs. So this is technical. This is simply, there's more than one way to put an API together. And again, if you want them to interoperate, best to have them work in the same way. So we've had some experts, some expert help actually from some of our partners on how to do this, and picked out the most suitable design options there. The next one I want to build on, this is quite a big area, business functional groups. So this is where our members are really contributing. This is for retailers or suppliers to the industry, anybody who's got knowledge of a particular scenario, and this could be, whether it's loyalty, payments, point of sale transactions, anything. We'll come to the list shortly. So to come together in dedicated work groups on the particular topic, discuss the, as I say, scenarios or use cases they think the messages should support, and the contents of the message that are needed. So this is really, the key business input, which defines how bits of application should talk together at a non-technical level, because this is still business level. What information and what data is needed to be exchanged. The next bit is down. Now we're into the technical part. So API code. So yeah, I'm sure no programmer will write something from scratch if they could simply copy it. So and that's what we offer here. Simply copy ours. And I should explain, I suppose, if you looked at the full, I don't know, scope of an API, it's a lot about communication, certainly, but there's also business logic behind it. So you call an API, get me a price or tell me my loyalty points or whatever. What we're defining in all this, and which the code that programmers can download, is the communication part. It's the front end of that communication. The actual business logic at the back, that how you calculate, what somebody's loyalty points are worth, or decide your next price change. That's your business logic. That's perhaps competitive advantage that we're not sharing in an open standard. The open standard is simply the easy bit, how to communicate. So that's what's there. And then there's tools to help developers. And again, as this is a business talk, I'll just point out one of them, which is testing and certification. So of course you want things tested before they go out out into your business, but with certification you can even specify, if you're not building things yourself but buying them from others, you can say, I want your products to be certified, and then that way I know they're the best they can be to meet our standards.
Wow. I think, thank you, Ian, for your explanations. So as you said, it's one IFSF and Connexus offer throughout so this open retailing environment, and you named it a suite of different features.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think it's important to make us all aware of the existence of that API website, shall I say, where you can grab all the necessary elements for you to build up APIs. And I think the how do you call that, the cornerstone of that let's say API world is probably the data dictionary.
Yeah.
I believe with John, especially from IFSF, are spending a lot of hours and days just to be sure that the data dictionary is really consistent for, let's say, the end users. And you mentioned a very good example with the pump or dispenser or whatever, how to say, word defining the same feature, in fact. So
exactly, and we'll go into that. I think when the next session is on Thursday.
Thursday, yes, Thursday. Yeah, we'll go through that in details. But
yes,
tremendous job. Are you through with all the let's say the concepts? And I think it was quite clear to make, let's say, the management, as you mentioned, that was the purpose of this presentation, to make anyone, in fact, to understand what is the world of API. We have some questions.
Yeah, there's one more thing maybe we should quickly cover before taking questions, which is just the topics, and I'll just run through these quickly. There's a lot more detail on these. I'll go to our next slide. So the topics we already have listed. We're working with Connexus, as I said. Our members together have come up with a list of priorities of areas they want APIs for, and this is what's come up so far. They may think of, well, I hope they will think of more areas they want to cover, but let's briefly go through these. I was going to bring in a few other people to talk through these, but there's probably not time, so let's just do it between us. I think I'm going to start at the bottom. I mean, this goes very roughly, I suppose, from forecourt up to the business management. But as we've established, APIs are for use anywhere on the internet, so any of these could be used, from the cloud or whatever. So the bottom four, I suppose, are all around forecourt devices, forecourt device controller, as it says, stock management, site assets. Site asset could be anything, any bit of hardware on the site, car wash, anything. So these are all APIs, I suppose, about one is master data about those. What are they? What are they doing? What are they selling? Configuration. How do you want them to sell? Anybody who's worked on a forecourt will know there's multiple ways of configuring those things. Status information, getting back alerts, meter reads, whatever. And transactional, start the pump, stop the pump. So these APIs have been around thanks to actually some of our colleagues. John Carrier has mentioned, we mentioned already, Gonzalo, I think we've mentioned earlier in the day. So these are in our first API collection you'll find on that open retailing website, and they've been added to. The next one, digital offers, is so this is about, I don't know, in the old days, I remember my mother, maybe yours was the same, Francois. We used to get cardboard washing powder boxes, and there'd always be a coupon on top. You have to cut it out, and it would give you, 5 pence, I suppose it was, off your next box of this thing. Not 5 shillings. Probably the whole box cost 5 shillings. But yeah, so this is the digital equivalent of that, which has certainly from from Connexus, we've heard there's a wide need for this in the US. There's a lot of that kind of offers going on, and those offers come from lots of different parties. And anybody, whether it's your washing powder supplier or your favorite fizzy drink or whatever, they're all putting out offers. And the poor retailer has many points they need to communicate with. So it makes absolute sense that we have standard APIs for digital offers. Next couple, maybe you want to touch on payment and loyalty, Francois.
Well, yeah, there are discussions, in fact, on how those two worlds should evolve, especially for the payment and the payment devices, especially when let's say the mobile payment is getting into the world of the payment itself. I mean, the plastic card, shall I say, versus the mobile, where the mobile involves most probably more APIs than before, and as such, we need to work on those aspects. And for the loyalty also, we have for let's say decades now standards to process loyalty, but it's on the shape of the legacy payment system, shall I say. But now there are some use cases and business requirements for loyalty where you want to have a kind of cross-program loyalty, let's say exchanges between different loyalty, let's say, providers. And as such, our retail networks need to have a kind of a standard to process any kind of loyalty, as they could process any kind of card payment, for instance.
Exactly.
So the world of loyalty, where of course from an act of purchase can be transformed into a loyalty, let's say registration of a basket. It has to be, let's say, brought to a server, and we need to here define what should be the APIs to be able to either push or pull the information to the right loyalty engine or whatever the retailer is willing to retrieve some loyalty information.
Exactly, thanks, yeah. And the next two maybe we'll take together. So mobile you've already mentioned, and cloud POS calculator perhaps fits in the same way. I mean, both of these are different ways that functionality that's traditionally in your point of sale could move out of it. Obviously, the mobile is the customer with their own device, whether they are remotely click and collect ordering, or on your site purchasing fuel, or even in your store, perhaps using their mobile as their own personal point of sale.
Yeah, the famous click and collect, and that is becoming popular with the pandemic crisis we're suffering. It becomes very much popular when all the stores are not all, but most of the stores not selling food are closed. They get organized to set a pick and collect, and the mobile, of course, is one of the possible devices to manage properly this click and collect, let's say, customer journey.
Yeah, and then the POS calculator is interesting. This perhaps moves on. It moves into the loyalty area that you touched on, where you want to add to your point of sale some features that perhaps it doesn't have. You want some special loyalty handling, or tax, or could be anything, interface to a payment handler that's separate. So this allows you to take elements or processes from the point of sale and take them out of the point of sale and put them in the cloud and interact with different points of sale. Yeah. And then the last two, I see David Edsel's joined us. So David, we record a little bit of audio on these, but I'm sorry, I don't have time to play it. So I'll just explain briefly. I mean, these are, well, POS activity report is perhaps what it says, but the point is, the point of sale, the POS, need no longer be the single product that sits in your store and talks to one other device. First, you could have multiple points of sale, as we already said. It could be mobile, it could be pay at pump, it could be pay at anything, pay at the car wash, pay at the coffee machine. So in your environment, you may want many of these, and you want them all somehow to give a consolidated view of their trade back to your back office or head office or whichever reporting systems or MI, etc., that you want to use. So this is activity as exactly as it says, coming back to other systems, reporting back, and in time as well. I mean, you'd want this typically real time or near real time, not wait till the end of the day as we traditionally did. So that's that one. And then the business data exchange. This is mostly master data. So the opposite of what we just said. How do you configure all those things, whether it's configuring your consumer website or configuring your own point of sale, or many points of sale. You want to send data down, price data, products, barcodes, whatever else. So that's the APIs to send those, and includes actually stock levels, which we know some interactions will need. So very rich set of topics our members have already thought of. As I say, there'll be more. If you want to look at any of these, there's a number of resources through our website or the Connexus website or through Open Retailing, or we're welcome to join any of our work groups. Any member is welcome to join any work group that interests them and talk about their speciality and make sure that our APIs cover the needs they have. Or if you want to your suppliers to follow our standards, do encourage them to come along and join the appropriate group as well.
Yeah, the key word is to provide interoperability between those different environments, in fact. So exactly. This is one of the questions I was about to raise.
We can go on to the questions. Yes, please do.
Well, the first is what are the API's applications, and I believe through this slide and your explanations, you've provided a good illustration where the API standards we produce do help our members to develop their business, in fact. So I've got some questions. There's one, I will take one from Maria Vidali. I don't know if it's the right pronunciation. Sorry, Maria, you mentioned that I forgot the Greek cheese, the feta cheese, to
the feta,
illustrate the different variations
I like
of
that one too.
The milk. But I've got a question from Maria, who's asking, is it important which system provides the API? When you were mentioning the example of ARD, this is really practical.
Okay.
Providing the information.
Yeah, this is maybe the push or pull. I could even go back to that slide possibly.
Yeah.
Which one should provide the API? Well, I think it depends. In my mind, we might add this to the panel session on Friday, but in my mind, it depends which one's running a process. So if I don't know, you're running a particular head office, say, process in D, and you want some information from a site, then it makes that sense that D uses this GET type of API and just goes to A to get it. But equally, if you've got some information you want to push to others, so you're running a process where you've produced some information, you want others to know it, then it makes sense to post it. Of course, I mean, the point about communications is both ends need to understand. So both ends, in fact, need the same structure of the API. It's just one's sending it out and the other one's receiving it, but they both need to understand it.
Maybe a complementary question to the question of Maria is, the same system can be push or pull. I mean, in its configuration, there's no rule here behind. It's the API that drives which system is going to start, let's say, the communication. But one same system can have both features, push and pull.
Yes, of course. Yes, yeah, they're both equally possible. I mean, as you get into an implementation and talk about a particular scenario or use case, I suppose it will become, perhaps more obvious which one is the right one to use. And I was trying to think whether any of our work groups would discuss that kind of thing. Possibly in our work groups developing use cases, they will be discussing whether push or pull makes more sense for in a particular scenario. I'm not sure about that actually.
Okay. I've got a question from David Blith, and I hope I pronounced properly his name. David is asking, will retailers work through FDC suppliers to add API-based equipment and or POS?
Sorry, say again. Will retailers work
through FDC suppliers to add API-based equipment and or POS?
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, good question, David. That I suppose ultimately that depends on the retailers. So they could, and John Carey, who's probably on the call, is the expert here. So I mean, a point of sale or multiple points of sale could use the APIs directly without a forecourt device controller, or they could go through a separate device, which is the forecourt device controller. There's both options are possible. Which way is the market going to go? That's a good question as well, David, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I certainly couldn't answer that. If I understood the question correctly, that is.
Yeah. There's another question I'm trying to find from your homonym, Jan S. Brown, in fact. He's asking, as we move to cloud and APIs, do you see the IFSF moving away from device-based standards, that is to say POS standard, mobile standard, and to switch to functional standards instead of loyalty, payment, etc.? And do you see this causing future interoperability problems?
Yes, very thoughtful question from my colleague. And I suppose my view is, everybody probably got their own view on this. My view is, yes, they must be functional in that, we know an API will have a business purpose, a scenario it's talking about. It will have a set of data and resources it intends to transmit in and receive back, and whether it's been sent from one particular device that it was originally intended for, or, I mean, it could be perhaps your own data lake that's communicating the same information that's been stored there, and now there's a dialogue going on there. So yes, I think what's important is the functionality of the API, and then we put that functionality where it's needed. And different retailers will, I mean, this is the whole point of competitive advantage. Different retailers will think about different ways to use the same information in different places, and they need our APIs to be available to use wherever they choose.
Merci. I've got a question from David. I will qualify your question, David, as all rather political, because it's probably the influence of the recent events in the US. But I will raise the question to Ian anyhow. Is from what we heard, early advocates for APIs were the merchants and oil companies. Are those still the chief advocates, or have software suppliers taken on that role now?
This might be a discussion to have in, so Nick and Mirko have a discussion with suppliers to the industry on Thursday, the last session of the day on Thursday. And it is for suppliers, so I won't be joining it. It'd be interesting what their view is. Clearly, there's a time when the big oil companies, as David has mentioned, were asking for things and demanding things from their suppliers. But I suppose the question goes back to, who's setting the agenda now? In the world, I've heard stories from some suppliers, some big stories where, big suppliers where they really want to push to use APIs, and they're choosing that this is the way to go. Equally, we know some of our retailer colleagues are pushing their suppliers to use APIs. So I think it goes both ways. What the balance will be going forward, I don't know. I mean, in our industry, we know there's smaller, well, I say smaller, there's a branded wholesalers, big networks. We've seen who just bought Asda. Those type of contributors to the industry have not traditionally set the standards, but maybe it's them who's going to emerge in future. Who knows?
Okay, yeah, difficult question to answer. I can understand. Merci, and maybe the last question prior to close that session. I cannot avoid Jeremy's question, Jeremy Massef from Circuit.
Hi, Jeremy.
And it's a long question, so get prepared to answer, Ian. So he says, Jeremy, in the payment industry, the key assets for proximity payments require both security and communication standards determined by each card scheme, but based on ISO, EMVCO, and PCI standards. So first question is it realistic for IFSF to design standard APIs that do not respect this? For an M business, card not present payments, the story is different, but even these still end up in currently ISO 8583 links to schemes and card issues. So second question is, should IFSF be looking to bridge the two worlds?
Yes, good question. And I'm going to give two answers to it, actually. So one is, of course, there are other payment methods around. There's instant payment, there's bank transfer, where there's apps, things on your phone even, where there's apps which handle the payment without reference to those traditional, perhaps the EMVCO processes. So I'm sure our retailers would want to be able to take whichever payment method they deem is valuable to them, and so I can see APIs emerging for those kind of things. For the more traditional card-based, or maybe not physically a card, but card-based processes, my answer is strictly I don't know. I'm not the expert on that kind of stuff. This is where I would really point to joining the equivalent work group. And in fact, Jeremy, you've been part of many of those work groups, I know. So I would defer to them to try and answer that type of thing. But it'd be interesting to see where it goes though.
Merci beaucoup. Sorry, but I think we are at the end of the session, and I think we need to give some messages prior to close. Today's sessions. So thank you very much, Jan, for a really informative session and a great summary for commercial managers of why they need to understand what APIs can do for their business.